trees as well. One example would be juniper encroachment, where there's predominantly juniper trees. Also, piñons can also act in this manner as well. Sagebrush, which I just mentioned, is another one that can do this. And they take over rangelands, and then they generally alter them to predominantly where there's only sagebrush. There will be a few native grasses in there, but not many. Any questions from Beverly, Tyler, or Wilson?
Brian.
Yes.
This is Beverly. I just had a comment going back to how you were how you had mentioned the avenues that invasives can come in to areas here in the San Juan Basin, the river area. There's through the diversion of the irrigation water off the San Juan, and there's all those different kinds of seeds that come floating down, so that could be another way here in this area. And then just an additional comment, I couldn't help it but think that we tend to purchase our hay from Nappy. And I know there's a lot of people out of Arizona that come through there for feed, forage, and there's a lot of invasives in those in that forage hay that they sell as well. So that's another local avenue for dispersion of invasives. Those are the two comments that I wanted to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. But the it's a good thing that you mentioned water. I always overlook water, but distribution of even noxious seeds through water, especially if you do flood irrigation. I've actually seen this in our fields. We were irrigating one year, and you just see all of these little dark seeds floating. They kind of look like pepper, but they're a little bit bigger. And then, but you could just see it. Before, I had only heard of this from other people who have irrigated using an open channel. But to actually see it for yourself, it's like, that's pretty amazing. I mean, they still can blow in from using wind, trucks, vehicles. Oh, people are also a very good source of seed distribution for noxious plants, because, for example, bullheads or goat heads, if you pick them up from, like, say they get stuck in your tire, you're going out to do a house visit or home visit, you're helping somebody with their conservation plan, and then they actually will probably get stuck onto even your shoes and your clothing. So just think of the many ways. I mean, not just people, not just animals, birds, it's actually people distributing them. And then you go home, you clean off your shoes, and then you're releasing those seeds in your area, and it hasn't been seen there before. So again, many avenues to noxious weeds or invasive weeds distribution, not just on Navajo, but across the world. There are dedicated branches in the US government, APHIS, Animal Plants Health Inspective Service. They do a lot of the ports, trying to restrict certain insects, certain plants from coming into the US. So many avenues. They've actually have trained dogs to take the scent of, notify us of the scent of certain types of, I think it was mold is one, but then also other animals. So that's pretty interesting of the links we will go to. Noxious plants, they're designated generally by the, one example is the ag department in each state or tribe or government county agency. all the noxious plants or weeds are invasive. It just once they get established. Next slide, please. The term weed is defined as where it is not supposed to be. I will use the Russian olive as an example. We do have it was actually brought in through an NRCS program. The person who had introduced it saw it as a good erosion control. However, it just had gotten out of hand and is here in the US, it is predominantly now seen as obnoxious just because of how much water it consumes. I believe it's 30 gallons an hour. I heard juniper was like 28 gallons an hour. So that's a lot of water to be consumed by these trees. So the term for invasive weed is an invasive plant that are not wanted. So these lists again are can be defined differently by different types of counties and different types of states. So it's always best to look at that listing. The Navajo Nation list will almost mirror that list. In particular, there again, they might not include 1 or 2 plants, maybe 4 at most, but predominantly they will look at all of these lists in our regional states and then apply that. And these do change. I think through the SWCD, they have actually made recommendations to remove one, but add another one that they had seen come predominantly. Next slide. Okay, so types of invasive weeds, again, they're not indigenous to the US. They come from other continents, literally. So Eurasia is some of the is where some of them are originated. The Russian olive tree does come from Eurasia. I want to say Iran and Afghanistan. And I gotta double check that. Global movement, we have become more globalized. Our products we are sending out products and we are receiving products. So it's just keeping track of them. Just like Beverly had mentioned, hay export and import. So hay that's brought up from, like say the Phoenix area is brought up. It can have certain types of weed seeds there. Colorado hay that's brought down. And also it can actually be in seeds as well. Seeds that have been purchased from a company. They might have some weed seeds in there. And if you look at the tags on those seeds, they give a percentage. It's going to be like 0.01% possible weed seeds in there. And then the rest of it is what you actually paid for. They're highly competitive. They adapt to the regional ecosystem. And they produce a lot. They are prolific producers. They produce a lot of seeds. One quick thing about seeds is they are regional. Like for example, we do not grow temporary beans here on the Navajo Nation. Temporary beans predominantly grow in the Tohono O'odham reservation area that is over by Tucson. So they do grow well here, but in one small test I did, I was watering the temporary beans too much, not knowing anything about temporary beans. So they actually rely on less water. If you irrigate them with less water, they will produce more seeds, more beans. So what I was doing as I was applying a lot of water, not knowing this fact about this type of seed. So seeds are pretty adaptive. Next slide, please. So invasive weeds, they can alter the composition of the landscape, the function. If it had maybe a spring, they might actually use up all of that water that was there. The structure of the ecosystem, it might have been a salt bed or a small spring, juniper, not juniper. Yeah, junipers can come in, they can absorb the water, they can change the landscape, they can remove grasslands and predominantly make it a juniper habitat. So those are some of the negative impacts. They can reduce the population of the native species. So if we have, like, say, I always want to go back to juniper and Russian olive, but then also there is salt cedar in there. Salt cedar is has a, if you burn it, it gives off a lot of heat. So a lot of the conservationists don't like it because if it starts to, like a little small forest fire in there, and it can burn at a high intensity to where that it will actually destroy the microorganisms that live in the ground. So that's one of the reasons they don't like it. Loss of habitat is another. It outcompetes all of the native species. Loss of food source. Our native foods that we would harvest ourselves, those can actually move, and because of the loss of the ecosystem, we would have to travel further or find an alternate source for our native foods. I will say chichen, or sumac, is probably one of those types of foods, because I hear stories that it used to grow lower in elevation, but since the loss of the water, they're having to go further up the mountain, deeper into the mountains to find this resource. So it is altering the abundance of these native species, and then also reducing the number of these native species. So we're going to have to go further to find probably our medicinal plants. So you can include this into your conservation plan if you can get training to apply the herbicide or pesticide needed to reduce the impact of invasive plants. Next slide, please. Okay, degradation of habitat for animals. So the yellow willow flycatcher, I know that's a lot in riparian zones, so along rivers and streams, but also it's impacting the native species such as bears. I know bears now, they have been eating a lot of the juniper berries, not juniper berries, the Russian olive berries, and that is now predominantly a part of their diet. Nesting areas for waterfowls, migratory birds, fish, small reptiles, loss of habitat for birds, wildlife, deer, probably not so much. Gotta think on that one. Next slide, please. Also, the impact of the environment, sediment, the surface can lead to more erosion instead of less erosion. You can increase the floods, and then which will lead to more of a deep trench soil erosion, which will then lead to the water erosion will cause more of the soil erosion. So you're not going to be having the microorganisms, the grasses that would originally have held down the ground. We're seeing more of that being taken away with the introduction of these native plant or invasive plants, not native plants. The water quality, we can see a reduction in that. Streams, perennial streams that have been there for years, we're going to be seeing less of that. Tamarisk also will consume a lot of water, same with Russian olive. If you have an encroachment of juniper, you will see that the grasslands will start to dwindle a little bit. Impacts on riparian zones, those will change. Certain types of plants that we used to find will be gone, but you're going to also see the introduction of other plants. One plant I will point out is the yellow clover. It looks like alfalfa, but it has a yellow leaf to it. That is also an introduction from hay. The animals consume the hay that is purchased from, I will say, the flea market or another store, a realty store, or it's brought in. So, and then the animal will consume it, cows, horses, sheep, goats, and then they will deposit it through their feces and then in the environment, and then it will start to grow and you'll see it. Next slide, please. Dissolved oxygen depletion, that's really important, especially as far as tillage. We need the oxygen that's in the ground, but also the CO2. If we're constantly tilling all the time, those levels will be depleted. You're going to increase the pesticide use or herbicide use. There are requirements for using herbicides and pesticides. One thing is that you have to get a license from the state. You have to attend a number of continual education courses throughout the year to maintain your license. You have to pass an exam, you have to pay a fee. And also you have to identify what species you're going to be applying this herbicide or pesticide to. So if it's a weed or a noxious plant, but also if it's a pest, like say on your, I will use squash bugs as an example. However, they have not really found a, I want to say cure for squash bugs or something to minimize their impact. So a lot of the corn crops have been decimated by squash bugs. So they're still looking into effective ways to control them. Also, the soil and water quality, you might have high nitrogen in your waters due to that you have applied a fertilizer in your field, and then a portion of that has been washed away and it is now into the local stream or the local aquifer. Also, the soil quality will probably be low because you have high nitrogen, and then you need to neutralize that by planting something that can extract that nitrogen out of the ground. Fire impacts, we've seen wildfires in New Mexico, but also here on the nation. Somebody is burning something when the winds are high and it just takes off. But this also goes back to the fact that here on the nation, we have not had prescribed burns. Fires are a natural part of the ecosystem. They, what fires do in a forest setting is that it will clear all the small seedlings that have grown up. And what we will mainly see are the big tall trees that are probably hundreds of years old. My guess is probably anywhere from 100 to like 500 years old, if not a little bit more. So also the importance of fire too is that some seeds will not react until a fire goes through the landscape, and then they will start to emerge after that because it's a part of their ecosystem or part of how that seed germinates. Next slide, please. So some of the backdraws, unfortunately, you see a decreased value in the land. You see the decreased forage potential. If you have a grass fire, if it's pretty intense, it takes time for that land to recover. Increase of illness and death in your livestock. It could be an impact of they're eating a non-native plant, they've consumed too much, which would result in their death. The other thing too is if your livestock is also caught up in a wildfire, that's one thing. Also, an illness, generally you'll probably see, like say a sheep, for example, they'll start to foam at the mouth a little bit. They probably consume something along the way as they're grazing. Cows are a little bit tougher. and a little bit more difficult to diagnose. The impacts to your livelihood, you're going to see if you lose 2 cows, if you have a herd of 20 and you lose 2 cows, that is a lot, because probably on an open market, that's about $2,000 per head. So you're out $4,000 if you wanted to raise the have that animal become pregnant, raise a calf, and then you're able to sell that calf off. So, and the same would apply to sheep or horses. Cost for control. It's always good to be proactive. If you have a horse, you're able to ride the range a little bit faster. You can see where animals are going. But also, if you're simply herding sheep, you take them out to graze in a particular direction, you change your grazing direction the next day, but you're also seeing what the landscape is. You see where cockleburs more in one area, you don't see them in another. You see these other plants maybe being established there that weren't there the previous year. You see Russian olives starting to emerge. So you can also gauge these things just by year. You have an increase of allergies because it can go back to the introduction of a non-native plant that was not there previous years, but then now it's there. It's your reduction in recreation opportunities. For example, on these in a private land scenario, you're able to offer hunts to outside people and our entities, and with the reduction in your grazing area, you might not have as many elk or deer available for them to hunt. Next slide, please. So managing invasive plants is up there in all of these agencies. It can be Farm Service Agency. It can be even the Forest Service. If you graze your animals on Forest Service land, and then also within NRCS, if you have a field, if you're trying to improve your rangelands and you have this plan there, you go out twice a year looking for invasive plants, or you have identified these invasive plants along the roadways leading to your range or along your field areas, and you monitor them throughout the year, see if they're increasing or they're decreasing, or you have implemented a management program to possibly where you're using a herbicide to control them. So, or you're using a biological agent. What I mean by biological is that you're using insects to control, let's say, the morning star bindweed. You're using insects to control bindweed. So that is a little bit different than using a herbicide. So that you can write into your plan. Next slide, please. So eradication versus control. How many of you have heard that cows can be trained to eat tumbleweed? Did I lose you guys? Are you guys asleep? You can open your mic.
I do. Be trained to eat tumbleweeds?
Yes.
I did not know that. I want to hear more of this.
Okay, so you're going to train one calf. Let's say it's an older calf or it's a younger calf. You just keep feeding it tumbleweed. But the trick is, it's not when it's producing all of these sharp barbs that come from the tumbleweed, like the goat heads or the bull heads. You're going to have to do it in the beginning stage when it's still young. You pluck them, you feed them to the cow, and you continue this. And then once that calf grows up and knows that, okay, if I eat this at this stage, one, it's going to be high in vitamin C, which is a bonus for the cow, but also you're reducing the tumbleweed from spreading to growing it, to letting it grow into its adult stage where it's producing all of these seeds. It loses all of these seeds and then it dies off, and then more tumbleweeds come up. And it teaches its calf, okay, like it shows the calf, if you eat this type of plant at a younger stage, and then eventually that cow will grow up, it'll teach another calf, but then also the cow will also teach other calves, okay, if we all eat this plant at this younger stage, one, it's more nutritious, but they're not going to, you won't see the impact of the tumbleweed in your area. Compared to if you completely eradicate it, is that you spray a broad-based pesticide, you're going to be destroying not just the tumbleweed, but other plants and other grasses as well. You're just going to be wiping the slate clean. That is bad in the sense that, and it's good, but I will explain the bad part, is that you're completely wiping the slate clean, but you might not have the mechanism in your conservation plan to be reseeding the area. And that's where the bad part is that you're going to be opening it to more weed seeds to be brought in to your land. And then you're just going to be growing more weed seeds at that point. So it's really important to one, to talk to your conservationist if you get a chance to work with one, but also ask questions. Okay, if I do this, how will this affect it? And there are some herbicides and pesticides that only target that main plant.
Yes, who's calling?
Beverly, can you put yourself on mic? So that's one of the two differences between eradication and control that I just remembered right now. So the other thing too is that if you have a grove or the Russian olive plant or tree in your area, you can do a cut stump method, to where you're going to be cutting the tree, you're going to be applying the herbicide, but it's controlled. It's in one area, you're only going to apply it in this one area and no other place. The only thing about doing that method is that it requires a lot of work. If you're the sawyer and you're applying the herbicide at the same time, you're going to be really tired. If you get a group of people, let's say 12 to help you, even 6 people, you have somebody cutting the tree, the branches, they're being piled aside, and then you have one person designated as the applicator. That's a lot better than doing it by yourself. So in your conservation plan, try to incorporate other people if you can. Next slide, please. So again, early detection, your Russian olive is my example. If you start to see it coming in as a seedling, it is better to control it then when it's a 25-foot tall tree and its base is 20 feet wide and it has all its thorns and everything. That's a lot easier to control than later. So a rapid response would be good when you're getting ahead of the encroachment. Unfortunately for Russian olive, the best method is a chemical one. This is the one where you have to be licensed by the state. You have to get your license, pay your fees, get your continuing education to be an applicator. Mechanical, unfortunately for Russian olive, that is in tractors, bulldozers, even you physically pulling up the trees, or even the noxious plants, invasive plants. That would be that method there. It is a lot of work to try and dig it up. You would probably be doing more damage if you're going to be using a backhoe trying to dig up Russian olive trees and roots. It would be a lot. Biological control, there has been some success in I don't want to say the government, but entities to develop a using insects to control Russian olive or even tamarisk. Cultural concerns and preservation, probably just looking at how can I do this? You would probably limit, let's say, I would say animals grazing in a certain area, but birds could also still bring in some. So this one's a little bit different. Maybe using, like, say, dogs to control prairie dogs. Or oh, maybe like falconry to control prairie dogs. Tyler, we gotta look into falconry if we can use it on prairie dogs. Or even culture, let's say using the black-footed ferret or even the weasels to control prairie dogs. That would probably be cultural. Yeah, that would fall perfectly in line with that. Next slide, please. So early detection, again, if you're, it's always going to be different from a field that you're using to the actual rangeland. If you have it on your calendar, I'm going to go out in the spring, set maybe one day just to look at your area, see what kind of remnants you have of invasive plants or noxious plants in your field, or even in your rangeland. You can see the old plant stems, and then okay, and you have a map in this area. I have this plant, so I can project that I might have more of this plant in this area. Or you have cuckleburrows in your field or in your range, you can mark it here. But you also notice that your sheep or even your neighbor's sheep graze in that area and they're going upstream, for an example. So you might see an encroachment either going upstream or downstream from where you first originally saw that plant. Unfortunately for cuckleburrows, I believe the only one is, it's just like a Russian olive. You would probably have to spray it. If you can train your animals to eat it beforehand, before it reaches that adult stage, that'd probably be another option. But again, it's you physically getting this plant, training your animals to see it. They learn to identify it, and then they will consume it. So detection, reporting, your IDing, you're weighing your options on time and money. This actually might take a year just to do, and then the following year you're going to actually do your response. So because well, you can get licensed by the state to apply a herbicide, but if you're probably going to do a biological control, it might take a little bit longer. Next slide, please. Chemical control, herbicide. Once you control it, control the spread, or you can do the eradication method. Again, there are some herbicides that are specifically targeted to the particular invasive that you're trying to get rid of, but it won't harm the other plants. Probably the only other part to that is the residue that would go into the ground because you're spraying in a broad area. You would really have to look at targeting non-native species, but also looking at the impact that you might have on the rest of the environment or the rest of the ground, the water, if you're doing this close to riparian zone. So you would also have to really look at the regulations, because you can be licensed by the state. However, if you are on tribal reservations, you have to contact I think it's by the heritage program for the Navajo Nation. You fill out a form and they're supposed to give you the go-ahead afterward to use that. Also following the pesticide protocols, your safety, if there's a high wind, of course you can't spray it. Time and effort concerns, how much time will, if you're doing a 20-acre field, you probably won't be able to spray it in one day. But if you have a high wind, you cannot spray. If you have a 9 to 5 job, I mean, how many days would you have to take off to treat this area? On a lot of these herbicide chemicals, you cannot enter the treated area for up to 2 weeks. So it's also identifying the area, putting up your signage if other people might be using the area or they might be driving by. So proper IDing of the plant, your target plant. Some plants will look the same a little bit, but they might be different. Let's see, a Russian olive and a Russian thistle, they look pretty close, but they're a little bit different. I believe they're cousin plants. Next slide, please. So aerial application. This was actually done on Navajo. I believe that it was done through the BIA and I want to say Department of Ag, but I think it was Fish and Wildlife. But from that cornfield area, which is south of Burnside, there's a stream and it goes all the way up to Coronado, and they sprayed that whole area, but they went beyond that and they continued all the way. I want to say Fort Defiance because there's another stream there, and then they went as far as the New Mexico border, and they aerial sprayed the whole thing. They use a herbicide that specifically only target the Russian olive tree, I believe. And you can still see the remnants of the old trees that were affected. A few years later, they've noticed regrowth. I think there's been some trees that actually survived the initial application, and they haven't gone back and resprayed. I know some of the areas they did a cut stub method, so they employed multiple applications. Next slide, please. So digging up mechanical, digging up the noxious weeds, or even cutting them, even mowing them, grazing, even let's say you use your tractor and you disc them over, that is mechanical. So when you're actually hoeing the cornfield, getting rid of those noxious plants, so this is the mechanical control. If you want to do 20 acres of mechanical control with just the garden hoe, that's a lot. Mechanically, you probably could do it faster, but again, it's fuel for the tractor. If you have to rent a tractor or you already own the tractor, getting that specialized implement to do the cultivation, or even hiring somebody to do all of that. So a lot of components that will go to time and effort. When do you want this done? Before what deadline do you have? If you're going to be planting a second crop. So multiple things will go into this. Next slide, please. Biological control. One example I use is the salt cedar. No, tamarisk. Well, they're both the same. They're using a biological control. It's a small beetle that consumes the leaves of the plant. If you have so much in abundance, they'll consume all the leaves. They will leave. They'll pretty much burrow into the tree, lay the eggs. They will leave the next year or later that fall, depending on the type of beetle it is. They will emerge and then they'll continue to eat the tamarisk. Another example I will use is probably using ladybugs to consume aphids. Aphids are a tiny white insect, but they multiply like crazy. So if you're in a greenhouse or if you have a garden bed, you see aphids, you might see just a few one day, but you might see a few hundred in like 2 days time. You might see a few thousand within like a few days again. So that's one biological control that can be used. There's ladybugs. I think it was lace flies is another one that consumes aphids. Oh, a funny story about using biocontrol. Somebody had a greenhouse and they noticed aphids in their greenhouse, so they bought ladybugs. So they were all excited. They set up the ladybugs. They're and then the farmer went back a couple of days, and he noticed that there were no ladybugs in the greenhouse. So he was wondering, like, what is going on? So he continues to check the plants. There's aphids, still aphid eggs everywhere, but he sees ants. So he starts following the ants. He hadn't noticed the ants before. So what the ants were doing is they were using the aphids to extract the sugar from the plants. But when the ladybugs were introduced, they consumed the aphid eggs. So they were consuming all of these aphids at a young stage, to where the ants were not getting the sugars from the plant. So in response, the ants began to attack the ladybugs and remove them from the greenhouse. That way they can harvest the aphids that were consuming the sugars from the plants. So that's a very interesting dynamic to see. It's pretty ingenious when you think about it. It's like, wow, these ants are using another species to extract sugars from the plant. So watch out for ants in your garden or your greenhouse if you're planning to release aphids. Wait, other way. If you're planning to release ladybugs and to control aphids. Next slide, please. So decontaminating your equipment, that can be as simple as taking it to the car wash, spraying it down, getting all the nicks and crannies where you think seeds are at, checking the tires, brushing out livestock. I don't think we're going to take a comb to our cows once they've been out in the range or the field. Tyler, do you do this? I don't do this, but I think we better start. But also checking your pant seams, your little nicks and cranny on your boots, just making sure that you're not transporting seeds. Also checking your vehicle. Buying weed-free hay, that's really hard to do. It actually can get kind of pricey. The other thing can be done is purchasing pellets, because pellets will actually kill weed seeds. They heat up the hay to a degree to where it will actually kill the weed seeds. So that's one option. Also looking at seeds and seeing how many weed seeds are in there, or noxious plants, but also learning to identify the seeds. Once we had purchased some seeds from a nursery, and then we had a retired professor here who specializes in noxious plants, and then he was looking through the seeds and he was identifying some of these non-natives, these invasive seeds that were in the mix. So it's not just identifying, seeing the plant on the range or your greenhouse or your field, but it's actually getting down to seeing what the seeds look like. So next slide, please. Non-native plants found on Navajo. You have camel thorn, Russian knapweed, Russian olive, salt cedar, perennial sorghum. So all of these, were probably imported. Canadian thistle. There's a lot of knapweed and thistles, leaf litter. Yep, Russian thistle on this side. So again, this list, if we're going just by state, they're not all the same across the board. Some are higher on their list, and some are even not on this list. But we might have one. I'm going to go with this Russian knapweed. That's on, it's on all three. Okay. So they do share similarities, but again, what's actually on this list might vary. Next slide, please. So just some, if you can learn the Latin names or even the scientific name of some of these noxious invasive plants, if you're going to be talking to somebody who specializes in herbicides or specializes in trying to get control or eradicate, let's say, buffalo grass or Bermuda grass, learning that Latin name is really important, because you could say Bermuda grass, but I guarantee you there's a lot of variations on Bermuda grass. But then also knowing the family is really important, because if you're going to be spraying for, let's say, cheatgrass, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other plants that can be identified in this family. Of course, they're obnoxious, but they're all will be, I guarantee you, some native plants that will fall under the same family. And then if you use that same, like an example would be using a herbicide that targets this only species, you're probably going to be taking out some of those native plants as well. So trying to learn the Latin names to them as our scientific name would be really helpful. Next slide, please. So this one we have Russian olive in the background, but then we also have the salt cedar, probably also mixed in with native willows. And it's just going to be showing the diversity. They will probably be very in close living quarters. They'll be in the same riparian zones. They'll be right next to each other. Next slide, please. But also being cautious of bird habitats, migrating birds, especially if you're going to be applying a herbicide or doing mechanical control. So IDing the noxious weeds, invasive plants on your farm, in your rangeland. We're going to include the juniper tree in this, the pinon tree in this as well, the big sagebrush also in this, because those can become invasive. Developing a map of your area, of your rangeland, your RMU, your field. Where are the roads? Where are the water sources? Migratory bird habitat, streams, lakes, and ponds can also be added to that list. Also establishing communication with, let's say, the heritage program, like say with the Navajo Nation, see what new plants have come up on their obnoxious listing for the nation, tribal leaders, not just here on Navajo, but you can also engage with other tribes. They might have a similar issue if you border, I don't know, let's say Hopi, or if you border the Apache tribes to the east of us, or even the Ute tribe to the north of us. So seeing what's on their list and how they're planning to treat it. Also, federal agencies, any new requirements that have come up, your grazing official, your farm boards, your chapter officials, when you're going to be spraying, or if you are designated as a certified sprayer, you're assisting with a community project where they're reapplying herbicide. Fish and Wildlife, of course, Department of Ag. If you're working on a, let's say, to the in New Mexico on Eastern Navajo, there's a lot of the BIA you would have to notify. You would have to be in contact with them. If you're on a NRCS program, the cost of hiring somebody to spray for you for any number of noxious plants. Also the NRCS state conservationist, you would have to include all of this information, doing your due diligence and making sure you're in compliant with whatever county or state codes that you fall in. Next slide, please. And reviewing your noxious or invasive weeds management program, because it might change. You, like say this year you have a bunch of cockleburrs. Next year you might have, let's say, knapweed come up, or you could get them all both at the same time, or you have seen more salt cedar in your area. So you would be the certified applicator, or you would hire somebody to do that. You would submit your application to the Navajo Nation pesticide program through the Navajo EPA. They'll probably call you back, making sure your license with the state is current, contacting Fish and Life, making sure that you're not threatening any of the endangered species, bald eagle being one of them. Other mammals would probably be black-footed ferret if you're on a farmland, or even on the range. I've seen them also on the range. Also, fish would fall into this category if you're in any of the stream areas. Next slide, please. Issues for the tribe, directive one is going to be lack of funding. Other one is awareness, probably as far as saying that you can apply it yourself. You have to hire a certified applicator. In truth, you can be the applicator. You can have people working for you during this application process, as long as you, as a certified applicator, make sure everybody is has proper PPE. So that's proper clothing. If you have to wear safety glasses, if you have to wear the hazmat onesie, making sure your program, you're following the directions, like say you don't have high winds when you're applying the herbicide. Everybody knows how to mix the ingredients for your pesticide or herbicide. You're in communication with the stakeholders. For example, probably Farm Board, Fish and Wildlife, the applicator program with the tribe, and then due diligence by notifying all of these agencies that you're still in compliance, you have your license, you're going to be applying on this day. If they have funds available, they might be able to help with offsetting the cost of maybe layer or even buying the material. I know a while back the tribe was our BIA was assisting with spraying fields with a herbicide to control noxious weeds. I don't know if that program still exists. Next slide, please. So the federal partners or coordination you would have to be follow is BIA, probably their field office, whichever agency you're located in, Shiprock Agency, Chinle, Tuba, Fort Defiance, looking at their noxious lists, but also utilizing their efforts if the herbicide that they're applying that you might be using was ineffective, or you might use something else. Other resources that they would have. Again, they might have some funds that they can help you out with. We won't know until we start asking these questions. If it goes on, Benita had brought up SWCDs. If they're making this a priority for them, it gets put on the NRC's list. Maybe BIA might utilize the same list, and this becomes higher on their priorities. So your application might be moved, might have more validation to be funded. So a lot of things to look at. Next list, please. So Bureau of Land Management, coordination with the state and other, if you are leasing land in another tribe, contacting their probably agriculture department, but then also following their tribe's rules and regulations. Doing your plan, also including the field work, probably doing a site visit with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but then also looking at other partners against weeds plan book. So again, if a particular weed, let's say knapweed, they wish to reduce it, across this particular county or on the nation, and that's in your conservation plan, you have identified it, you've consulted with a tribal entity, they've written you a letter saying that yes, to part of this program. Again, your application could be moved up based upon this. Next slide. U.S. Forest Service, if you're leasing an area for grazing, if you're working on a weed-free hay requirement, but this can also apply to probably NRCS. I gotta look at that one again. Doing the field work, checking the health of the forests, looking at, like, say, if you have any dead stands, which is the tree has been affected by something, it's just standing there dead, it's not alive anymore. Maybe it's a beetle kill. There are a lot of types of beetles that will affect trees, and some are very specific to, like, say, just pinon, or some are very specific to just juniper, ponderosa pines. There are a lot of beetles that might just affect one, but not all at the same time. So seeing your Forest Service program, but then also probably having your fire safety also on your list to think of in your conservation plan. All right, next slide. Fish and Wildlife, you service, please look at the endangered species. Some of them are very permanent, where they're on there, and some of them will be updated to where they might be on there from 3 years ago and they're not anymore. Also, the landowners incentivized program with the tribe, that one is a grant. If you're improving the rangeland and you're including riparian habitats for, like, say, waterfowls or migrating birds, that can be in your favor. Bureau of Reclamation, the Tamarisk Control and Removal Program. Water quality, water quality, probably as far as if you're down from a burn scar, that would be really important, because the water probably would not be able to support fish anymore, but then also able to affect the drinking water for your livestock, but then also wildlife. Also the aquatic invasive plants, but then not just limited to plants, but also species. The crawfish is one of those species that's invasive. So also looking at the health of the stream. If you see more leeches, there is another monitoring for streams and lakes. So probably adding that to your conservation plan would be important as well. Next slide. So the NRCS, the Farm Bill, environmental quality, and the program, that one's equipped. That one, unfortunately, you have to, I gotta check on this. I think you might have to go through the nation. I'm not sure. I'm still hoping it's a one-on-one basis, but I've heard rumors that you have to go through the tribe, then the tribe will then go to NRCS, and these are the list of people that will be applying for XYZ, or that will be receiving this funding. So another one is the Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program. That one is SWIP. Also the Lakes Project, and then also the Grasslands Protection Program. Next slide, please. Park Service Education, the Weed Free Forage Program, the coordination with that. USGS, identifying and new plant species can be invasive also, and also the response. NASA would be probably mapping, but there's a number of other programs that you can use for mapping. If you use one with, like, say, NRCS, it's probably best to stick with that one. They'll probably do an upgrade to the maps as far as an updated version, or they might be using a different map. And it's always good to, it gets tricky if, like, say, you're using a map that is developed from NRCS, but it doesn't work for BIA. They want you to use an XYZ map. From time to time, if you are raising a product, this can be beef, or even like a crop that will be feeding people. Also seeing what protection programs are out there, but then also making sure you're in compliance with, like, say, the Food Modernization Act. Also looking at EPA as far as probably your not just your fertilizers, but then also your herbicides, seeing the residue life, and after it's been applied, after you have applied it, and then see how long it stays into the ground. That would be very helpful. Next slide, please. Carrying capacity. This is a very interesting and complicated topic, but it's an important one. So carrying capacity is how many animals can be horses, cattle, and sheep. I mean, including goats when I say sheep. The land can support without having to. It can be for a period of time. Everybody likes to go with 365 days, one entire year. How many animals can I keep on here? But there's many factors to this. The land itself, the vegetation, the soil, the availability of water, if it's in a forested area, if it's in a true grassland where there's no trees for many miles. So a lot of factors. And this is really important, especially in a drought year, because let's just stick to a whole number. You have 100 head of cattle. You want to know, it's really important to know, one, if they're pregnant, two, if they're supporting a calf, which means they've already given birth and the cow is a few months old. How many bulls you have, or if you lease them, or if you do artificial insemination, a lot of small factors. The same can be said for horses. If the mares are pregnant, ready to foal, or if they're in their stages of pregnancy. So many things, many factors, many things, but all of this goes down to the fact that, okay, I can keep my animals on here for 1 year or for 6 months and no longer. And then you're going to move them to a different pasture. Next slide, please. So you as the owner, the subcontractor, the range manager, that's what you guys are going to be, the range manager, because you're going to go out, you're going to measure the forage twice a year from the same location, in exactly the same method. You're going to do the calculations as the same as you did the year before, and you're going to do this year after year. You're going to take pictures to, one, visually see the forage, the landscape, exactly the same every year. You're not going to do any alterations. You're going to establish a transect. This is about 50 meters. What is 50 meters? Tyler, is that like 200 feet?
Was that like 150 feet?
Because one meter is roughly like 4 feet. Well, let's go with 150. 150 feet, that's meters. We always get stuck in meters when we do a transect. So one, it's always good to know the plants on your range. Blue grama, black grama, galleta grass, side oats, all of these native plants that can be there. If you know your noxious or invasive plants listing, that's also good. You're going to place a rebar on one end of this 50-meter transect and another one on the other location. You're going to take a picture in the cardinal direction. So it's going to be east, south, north, or west. From this project I've been working on, we always take the picture on the east side to the west first, to the north first, and then to the east. So you're going to establish your own protocols. If you have landmarks, like say you have a mountain in the back, a mesa, you can see the canyon start to form, or you have a stream, you're going to always take that picture with that particular landmark all the time. Not just in the eastern direction, but always shoot for a landmark. That way you can always take that picture there. You're going to see the progression of the rangeland, or if you have an encroachment of trees or other plants, you will see that, and you're going to keep that a part of your records. So you're going to walk out. The quick and easiest way is a 50-meter measuring tape, and then you're going to go from one side, and you're just going to list all of the plants that are there. Again, this is really important if you know native plants. It's really hard to establish names of plants because some of them almost look the same, but they might be slightly different. The grasses are really like that. There is a general listing out there. If you ask your BIA person who's helping you develop your conservation plan, or even with here at the land grant office, we can provide you with a list of native plants. And then you're going to walk this line all the way down, listing every plant that you see, but you're only going to go 5 meters away from your transect, from that measuring tape going 50. You're going to go all the way down and then come back and then do the same. List all of the plants that you see. That's one method to do this. There are several methods to do this, isn't there, Tyler?
I can do this part if you guys want.
Sure. Go ahead.
I was the one who made. Okay, so yeah, just like Brian said, it's kind of complex to do the transect method. It's a little bit more time intensive, and it's a little bit more technical. Usually you'd want if it's a little bit hard for you, that's understandable. So they have this other one that's called the walk-in step method. It's called something else. I know we have a different presentation, rapid forage monitoring, something like that. It's from NMSU, but what you do is every 2 steps you look at the ground where your toes are pointing, and whatever your toes point to on that certain section, you just list it out. So let's say you took 2 steps, and then right at your left foot you have let's say it's bare ground, like there's nothing growing right there. So you write down bare ground in your book, and you take another 2 steps, and then at your toes there's maybe you step on a little spot of grass, or a little small plot of a little bunch grass. So you'd write forage, or you'd write grass. Then maybe say you take another 2 steps, it's another bare ground, so you write bare ground down. And then you take another another 2 steps, and maybe it's a sagebrush, or maybe it's some kind of woody material, or maybe it's a rock. You would write down that. And then from this, you take all the points where you have forage, and you kind of come up with a percentage of how much ground in a straight line that you kind of have forage on and how much you don't have. So you would take probably 20 steps, and you'd get about 100 yards worth of data. So that one's more of a real simple method to keep monitoring your rangeland. So this part about carrying capacity, the main thing you want to think about is, like Brian said, is getting that data, getting those reference points. So that way in the future, you can kind of justify why you're putting a certain amount of animals in a certain area and how long you're going to do it. So let's say you do this walk-in step method, and you can kind of tell that from how far spaced apart most of your plants are, that you actually don't have that much forage at a certain time. So maybe it'll be a good idea to move your cattle somewhere else, or to move them to another pasture kind of thing. The line break, just like he said, you kind of lay out, it's a different type of carrying capacity for your measurement. So the transect one is, can you go, I think it's 3 slides ahead. I just want to show them what a transect is. You can keep going forward. Right there, okay, in this picture right here, she's doing the transect. She's doing the transect method for doing for calculating carrying capacity. And this is the more technical one. So that little square tubing with PVC is known as your transect. And you take your just like Brian said, you lay down your transect, you kind of look inside your transect, and you kind of see what kind of forage would my cattle be willing to eat, or what kind of plants are there at that certain point. Is the ground covered, or is it more bare ground? So if you're calculating for forage, you would take out maybe your scissors, and you would say, okay, from what's right here, you would kind of cut anything that you think a cattle would eat. So if you really watch your animals, the main thing cattle like is grass, green grass, kind of a taller grass. Every now and then they'll eat something shorter. But for the most part, the main thing they target are those grass species. So you can do those, and you can cut those, and you can get you can dry out the forage material. And from this calculation we're going to show you next, it's kind of you take your forage material that you've dried out, and you input it into this calculation, and you can kind of tell how many animals you can keep on a certain rangeland for a certain amount of time. You can go back to the slide we were at before. All right. So there's different reasons for doing this. So like I said, that walk-in step method is more likely to show you what is the percentage of cover you have and what kind of forage you do have. Not to get technical, like it's more like a simple not a simple calculation, but a simple observation. So instead of doing what Brian said, where you say, okay, this is this specific species, this is this specific type of grass, or this is this specific type of forb, you'd more like break it down, and you'd say, okay, this is forage, my animals would eat this. I've watched my animals, they don't like this one, so I won't count that one towards my forage, I'll count it as something else. It's more likely just an observation to kind of see how much what kind of what kind of forage you have available, what kind of coverage you have available, and if you want to move your cattle or not. For the transect, it's more in depth. You want to know what kind of species you have, what kind of forage type you have, and how much ground cover you have. And you'd use that method. it's more in depth, but from that, because it's so in depth, we can do a calculation like from the next 2 slides over, and you can get a very accurate measurement on how many cattle you can move around. So we can go to the next slide. So your stocking rate. Your stocking rate is how many animals or units of livestock are able to graze for a certain period of time. So by doing your carrying capacity, like finding out how much forage you have, now you can use that to do this next calculation, which is known as your stocking rate. And that just kind of decides how many animals you can keep in a certain area for a certain amount of time. So that's the difference. So here's the calculation. So so we do our transects for, I think it was, we said for 150 feet. Now, we bag our dry forage. So that transect right there was, I think it was a meter by a meter transect, and then there's another transect that's, I think it's a square foot. The other transect was more likely a square foot. So I think there was, from the picture that we saw, was a different transect. But if you do the meter by meter, it's a big square transect. And you do your grass clipping or your grass cutting, your forage cutting, and then you bag it into a paper sack, like a lunch paper sack, a little brown bag. And you leave it somewhere where the air can move through and take out that the wet material from the grass you cut. And you do that because you want an accurate measurement of how many grams of dry forage you have for this next calculation. So for that one transect, you take your dry forage in grams, you times it by 35.6, and that's how you get your pounds per acre. So what you're doing from that little transect, you're estimating and you're making it bigger. You're making it from grams all the way to pounds, and you're making that little 1 meter by 1 meter square all the way to an acre by times it by 35.6. So you're actually estimating, and you're making that little tiny area really big to get to to estimate your area. So let's say we'll use this example. Let's say we had 50 grams of dry forage for that one little transect we took. So we times that 50 grams of dry forage times 35.6, you get 1,780 pounds of dry forage per acre. So now we know how many pounds of dry forage we have per acre. Now we have to do our utilization rate. So in our utilization rate, we have to leave 50% of whatever that dry forage is. We have to leave 50% on the rangeland, because if we take more than 50%, that's when we start doing damage to our rangeland. That's when you start doing damage to your plants, where the plants get grazed so much that they can't recover quick enough, or they start to die instead of being able to regenerate themselves. You do too much damage to the rangeland. So in our calculation, we cut that pounds of dry forage in half, and that's how much we can use for our livestock. But again, that gets cut in half again later on. But that's the general calculation in that. So keep in mind, the cattle will eat 2 to 3% of its body weight in dry forage material every single day. So an example, a cow with a calf would eat approximately 2.5% of its body weight. So let's say we have a 750 pound steer, and we're going to use the top percentage. We're going to say he eats 3% of his body weight every single day. From that, only one 750 pound steer is going to eat 22.5 pounds of dry material every single day. That's how much he needs to eat every single day to keep himself fed. And let's say we take that, now we're going to take that cow calf and insert it into our insert it into this equation. So let's say we have the cow calf, but it's at 1,850 pounds. And its utilization rate is going to be, we're going to say 2.5. So you times 1,850 times your 2.5, your utilization rate. So it's going to be 45 pounds of dry material every single day. That's how much she's going to need to eat every single day for one cow that's supporting a calf. So that's how do you get your dry materials every single day? And you also need to figure out your utilization rate of how much dry material you actually have available to you that you can feed them. So so just an example, remember we did that dry forage in grams. So we got 1,780 pounds. Let's say we'll use that. So I'm getting my calculator out. So 1,780 divided by 2, because we have to save half or else we start doing damage to our rangeland. Then we have 180 pounds of dry forage per day. Now let's say from the steer, he eats 22.5 pounds of dry material every single day. So we'll take our 890, divide that by 22.5. So that certain 1 acre in this calculation, that one steer can stay on there for 39.5 days. So he can stay there for a few, maybe a month and a quarter, somewhere right around there. But that's only if you're going to put one steer all by himself in that 1 acre. Which isn't really, we don't really do that. We don't usually keep them in their own. We don't keep them separated on their own. So maybe we'll keep 5 steers around the same amount of pounds. So you divide that number by 5 instead of just 25.3. And that's 7.9. So about 8. So if you were going to put 5 750 pound steers in this 1 little acre in our example, they can stay there for about 8 days. Once those 8 days pass, they're going to be eating so much grass that they're going to start doing damage to the rangeland. They're going to start doing damage to the grass, the specific species that are on there, just judging from our calculation. So we can only keep them in that 1 acre for about 8 days. So that's how you do this calculation. It's a lot, I know, but it's really important to know this and to know know how to take your transect data and to get your stocking rates, and then to turn around and use that to calculate your carrying capacity. We can go to the next page. It's more of a larger example, the next slide. So this is our sample calculation. This one's a little bit more real. This one's a little bit more real world kind of calculation. So let's say we go out onto our range and we take a transect. And for that one transect, we get 17 grams of dry forage material. So we take that, we times it by a 35.6. So that means we have 705 pounds per acre, which is more realistic, this 17 grams, compared to the last example we used where we got 50 grams. That would be more like an irrigated field. So this one is more closely related to a rangeland, which was 17 grams. So let's say out of the total acres of our area where we're taking this data, there's 120 acres. So we take our 705 per acre and we times it by the 120 acres. So for a whole entire 120 acres, we have 72,624 pounds available of dry forage material. So like we go back to our utilization rate. which is half. We want to leave half of the available forage material out there. So that way we're not doing damage to the rangeland. So you have to divide that 72,000 in half. And when you do that, you get 36,310 pounds of available forage. That's how much is actually available on your rangeland before you start doing damage. Now, the other part of this calculation is that it's not just your cattle or your sheep that are out there. There is also your wildlife. So your deer, you have to include them in their calculation. Because it's not like they're not going to show up and eat a little bit, but they're going to need the same amount as your cattle. So that way they're not doing damage to the rangeland. So you got to put them into this factor. So you actually have to cut it in half again. So we take our 36,312 pounds and we cut it in half again. So now left over, we only have 18,156 pounds left for our own livestock. So we had 72,000, but we had to cut it in half and then cut it in half again. So now we're down to 18,156 for our own livestock. Now in this example, we're going to have 12 cattle. Each one's going to be at 950 pounds. And they're going to use 2.5% of their body weight every single day. So if we do that calculation, we take that 950 times 12 times that 2.5%, that's 285 pounds per day. That's how much forage they're going to need to eat every single day to keep their body weight. So now that we have that number, we can divide the total amount of our dry forage left over, which is that 18,000, and then we divide it by 285. So we can do that. And so now, once you do that, we actually, all 12 of those cattle at 950 pounds can stay on that 120 acres of rangeland for 63 days of grazing. Once they go past that 63 days, on that 64th day, they start eating more than 50% of the available forage. And that's going to cause problems to our rangeland because they're going to be started eating too much. That's when you get into overgrazing, where they eat so much that they do damage to the plants. So after that, we're going to have to move them to somewhere else. We're going to have to move them to another pasture. And we're going to have to let that previous rangeland rest. So 63 days, 12 cattle, that's only about 2 months. Out of all that dry forage material and all of those calculations, we can only run those 12 cattle for 2 months on one rangeland. So I know it's very complex. It's very hard to get to these examples. So if anyone has any questions, we can go over it in more detail. Or if anyone has any questions on where we get these numbers, we can let you know. Can try to explain it a little bit better.
Maybe go in depth a little bit about how you got those numbers, like the 2.5% and 0.5.
Okay.
This is
Yeah, I
being
can do that.
recorded, so they would have the chance to go back onto this video and kind of look more and listen more in depth in it.
Okay, I can do that. So the first one is that 35.6. So the 35.6 is a calculation that's been created by I'm trying to remember what university it was from. Benita's the one that usually that knows exactly which one it was. I think it's the university in South Dakota. But for that one, what you're doing is you're timesing your grams by how many pounds fit into a gram. And then you're timing your square meters into acres. So it's like a double multiplication, but they put it into 35.6 times your number of grams for that calculation. So that's how they got that number. And then when we're talking about the 2% to 3%, that's the study they did, and they found that cattle need to eat that much forage percentage to maintain their body weight or to gain body weight. And it's all different depending on what kind of cattle you have. So if you're thinking of a cow and a calf, she's not just producing milk and she's not just sustaining herself. She also has to do that for her calf. So that would be the higher end of your weight. So you would want to use maybe 3% or this 2.5. On the lower end, we were talking about steers. They would eat a little bit more because they're still growing at the same time. But they're not going to be eating as much because they're not feeding two. So that's where we add that 2.5 in there. And then, so whenever you do this calculation, 2.5 to 3% is usually what you want to use for your estimation. But that's the general amount of forage of their body weight they need to eat every single day to maintain or to grow or to gain weight. So that's where that number comes from. And then
Is it normally done to stay at 2.5%?
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's usually good to stay at 2.5% when you're doing this calculation, because that's that in between 2 and 3.
Okay.
But yeah, if you want to be for sure, you can go to 3. You can just go automatically to 3% and just assume every single animal is going to eat about 3%. But if you want more of a balanced number, 2.5 is probably the better end. So, okay. So this calculation is how your grazing official and your this is how they get those numbers that are on your paperwork that says you can only keep this many animals in this area for a whole year. This is the calculation they use. I'm trying to remember because we did this at another one and they were asking why it's in days of grazing instead of animal units, but there's a you just change something around and then you get animal units. But this is the same type of calculation that they use to get those numbers that are on your grazing permits. So if you think about it, the number on your grazing permit, let's say that permit was issued how many years ago? 10, 20, 30 years ago, from the range conditions that were way back then. So that's how they got that number, but it's probably not the most up-to-date number. So if you can learn how to do this calculation, or you know someone that can do it for you. I know some people talk about reaching out to BIA, and your BIA technicians are supposed to be able to do this for you and keep you up to date on that. But it really puts you ahead when it comes to calculating out how many days you can keep a certain amount of animals in a certain location. And it really puts you ahead on your carrying capacity, in that maybe you can go higher than the number that's written on that paperwork. Maybe you calculate this out and maybe you need to go a lot lower and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to cut back on the size of my herd. I need to do all this so I can fit into that area where I'm not doing damage to the land and my animals are still gaining weight or maintaining their weight like they should be. So that's why it's good to know how to do these calculations. Any other questions or comments or anything they want to bring up?
Tyler,
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna announce that people can unmute their mics, but go ahead.
All right, thank you. Tyler, this is Beverly. I was just kind of curious. If the forage, is this dependent on forage quality or just forage in general?
It's dependent on forage in general. And you're right. There's another thing in that forage quality goes down, but during the time of year. So let's say you do it more towards winter and your grass is more of a yellow color. That's because it's going into dormancy where some of the nutrients and some of the forage quality goes down a little bit. So in that you might want to your cattle might need actually more forage to keep up with the nutrients. But this is more of like a calculation for a balance throughout the year where it's between spring, summer, and then a little bit of winter. So
Beverly,
more-
you can do this analysis also at different times of the year to when specific grasses are at their peakest of maximum nutriency. And if you have a big enough range, you can rotate your cattle to hit those specific times. So
yeah, it is very complicated, and a lot of people they see this, and you can kind of see that they're kind of worried about this. But it's important to learn. At the same time, sometimes if it's too complicated, that walk-in step method is also really good in kind of getting a good to get you good at judging the quality of your rangeland and how much coverage you have. And it's a lot more simpler to do. And I know Benita has a story where these people use this method, that walk-in step method, that really simple method, and they kept the journal for so long that when it came when someone actually, like, I don't know if it's accused them or something like that they're overgrazing, they're causing damage, and they need to reduce their herd, they were able to use the data that they collected doing that method to show that the range condition hasn't really changed. It's actually gotten a little bit better. Even with that simple method, they were able to kind of prove it, where they were actually able to not have to reduce their numbers because they could actually prove it with the data they took with the walk-in step process. I think there's one more slide, but that was just more how to do the transect, a little bit more in depth.
I have just a real quick question.
Go ahead.
Considering the overall topic of conservation plans or planning. So the work that that everyone is collaborating to do is helping out producers on primarily on the grazing side, on the generating and developing their conservation plans. And things are just now kind of like beginning a lot of this information for producers, and it seems like when I sit in and listen, most don't have the information they need to begin to frame, how they can approach their areas. And so, like a suggestion by Tyler to do one of the easiest ones to do, I guess, kind of like a quick assessment of sorts, is that walk and step. Would that be something that in general, or be something recommended to producers to consider to start having start building their knowledge or their information to build on their conservation plan from like year to year, or what the what is being mandated by the BIA, which is I believe every 5 years, although I've also heard 10 years. And that would be kind of like a question.
I found I found a video link to okay, so it's called RAM. So where the heck is it? I just had it. So rapid assessment methodology. That's what it's called. You can look it up, and it's I think it's the first video on the that you find, but it's by NMSU Rangeland, and it's on. Looks like it's on YouTube and Facebook. But if you want to see it done, that's I found the video for it.
Yeah, I did actually see that. I was looking through NMSU's stuff on range management, and I did run across that particular publication on the RAM. And I was thinking, sitting there looking at it, is like, if we were to share this with producers, they it might be overwhelming at first, even though it's probably more maybe doable for them. But yeah, I was just curious on that.
Okay. Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, everyone that's still on here, for sticking with us throughout the entire workshop and webinar. Thank you, Brian and Tyler, for providing this presentation for us, and thank Benita for us for providing the first half as well. We'll go ahead. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to announcement. I just want to share with you all that we do have a next upcoming training. This is a bee quality assurance in-person training that's going to take place on Monday, January 16th. It's going to be hosted at the Navajo Technical University Hospitality Center in Crown Point from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So this one's just regarding the BQA training itself. So our presenter is going to be Dr. Wenzel, and lunch will be provided by the NM Beef Council. So if you guys have your phone on right now, beside you, just go ahead and scan that QR code right there, and I'll lead you to the registration page to RSVP for your spot to come to the BQA training. But other than that, we do have a webinar next week on December 21st regarding prepping for lambing and calving. That presentation will be offered by Craig Gifford, who is the NMSU beef cattle specialist. So that will be on December 21st, next week on Wednesday, starting at 5:30 p.m. But that is all that I have for you, but I'll go ahead and give it to Tyler and Brian to see if they have any other workshops and in-person workshops that they want to announce.
The next workshop we have is going to be a series workshop. It's going to be more of a farm planning kind of workshop. So I think it's I'm trying to remember. It's going to be it's going to be an evening workshop. It's going to be, I think it was 6 to 8 o'clock. And it's going to be January 11th. It's going to be 3 days, and they're all going to be in a row. Let me find my calendar. So January 11th, 18th, and then the 25th. And then each one's gonna be only from, I think it was from 6 to 8 we have written down. So it's only gonna be a 2 hour kind of like an evening session kind of thing. But we're gonna go over different points of farm planning, like crop selection, I think it was cover, or no, we already did cover cropping. Tillage and kind of like planning that kind of stuff, how you're gonna use your farmland kind of thing. So we wanted to put it like during winter when everyone's kind of getting ready to plant, but it's still not time yet. So yeah, that's gonna be next month in January.
Okay, well, that's just about it, you guys. That concludes our workshop today. We almost made it to 4, so just a couple minutes away. So, thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that rest of you guys have a good night and good rest of your evening.